chronicler Devi had written about the rise and fall of empires for longer than most species had existed. She had filled thousands of volumes with the stories of civilizations that burned bright and then turned to dust. But when she sat down to write about the humans, her hands would not stop shaking. Not from fear, from something worse. From the knowledge that every species in the galaxy had been warned, and not one of them had listened. She always began the story the same way. At the beginning, at the silence. When humanity first joined the Galactic Concord, nobody paid much attention. They came from a single yellow star on the edge of an unremarkable arm of the galaxy. They were soft, short-lived, and had no natural weapons on their bodies. No claws, no venom, no armored skin. The other species looked at them and saw nothing special. The Velkhari, who had ruled through strength for 6,000 years, barely noticed them at all. The Concord was supposed to be a place of fairness, a great gathering of species where disputes were settled with words instead of weapons. That was the idea, at least. In truth, the Concord had always bent toward the powerful. And no one was more powerful than the Velkhari Dominion. Their fleets darkened the stars wherever they went. Their soldiers were tall, scaled, and bred for war across generations. When the Velkhari spoke in the Concord chamber, others listened. When they made demands, others agreed. That was simply how things worked. Humanity settled on the fringe worlds. They built colonies, grew food, raised families, and traded with whoever would trade with them. They were quiet neighbors. They helped when disasters struck other worlds, sending ships full of supplies and doctors, even to species that had insulted them. Many in the Concord thought this was weakness. The Velkhari certainly did. The trouble started slowly, the way all great tragedies do. The Velkhari Dominion had been expanding its borders for centuries, swallowing smaller species and their territory one piece at a time. Nobody stopped them, because nobody could. And now their expansion brought them to the edge of human space, specifically to the colony world called Mira 7. Mira 7 was a green and blue world, with wide oceans and gentle weather. Nearly 200,000 humans lived there. They had been there for 3 generations. Children had been born there who had never seen Earth. It was their home. The Velkhari wanted the system for its mineral wealth. They did not ask, they simply began. First came trade blockades that choked the colony's supply lines. Then came military patrols that flew dangerously close to civilian ships. Then came the insults, broadcast on open channels for everyone to hear. The Velkhari called humans vermin, soft creatures who did not deserve the worlds they stood on. Ambassador Yunari had been Earth's voice in the Concord for over 30 years. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes that never seemed to blink when she was angry. And she had been angry for a very long time. Over the course of 4 decades, Nari filed 318 formal protests with the Galactic Concord regarding Velkhari aggression against human worlds. She presented evidence, she showed footage, she named the dead from each incident. Every single time, the Concord responded the same way. They noted her protest, they expressed concern, and they did nothing. The other species watched this happen and felt varying degrees of guilt, but not enough guilt to act. The Velkhari were too strong. The risk was too great. And the humans were, after all, just humans. What were they going to do about it? Legate Puri was the Velkhari envoy to the Concord. He was enormous, even by Velkhari standards, with dark green scales and a voice that rumbled like stone grinding against stone. He enjoyed his position. He especially enjoyed the part where smaller species had to stand before him and beg for things they would never receive. But his favorite target was Nari. At a formal Concord session, after Nari had presented her 300th protest, Puri stood and addressed the chamber. His translator turned his words into every language in the room, and every species heard him say the same thing. He said that the humans protested like wounded animals, that it was almost endearing, that perhaps if they spent less time complaining and more time evolving, they might someday be worth listening to. Several delegations laughed, not all of them, but enough. Nari stood at her podium. She looked at Puri. She looked at the delegations who had laughed, and then she did something that confused everyone in the room. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that meant something had ended, though no one in that chamber was smart enough to see it yet. She bowed once, turned, and walked out of the chamber without a word. On Earth, Secretary General Ko Tae-sun watched the broadcast from his office. He saw his ambassador humiliated. He saw the chamber laugh. He watched Nari's face as she walked away, and he understood what that smile meant because he had known her for 20 years. He turned off the screen and sat alone in a dark room for a very long time. When his aide knocked on the door an hour later, Tae-sun told her to cancel his meetings for the rest of the day. He needed to think. Far away in Rishari space, Elder Motha saw the same broadcast. She was ancient in ways that most species could not understand. She had watched civilizations for 10,000 years. She had seen proud empires laugh at quiet peoples before. She turned to Devi, who was young then, and said something the chronicler would never forget. She said to pay attention. She said to watch the humans carefully now. She said that in all her years of watching the galaxy, the most dangerous creatures were never the ones who roared the loudest. They were the ones who stayed silent long past the point where silence made sense. Because that kind of silence was not weakness, it was a choice. And when a creature like that finally stopped choosing silence, the galaxy would hear it whether it wanted to or not. Devi wrote it all down, and in the years that followed, she would return to those words again and again, because Elder Motha had been exactly right. Every species that watched the humans assumed they were weak. They mistook patience for surrender. It was the most expensive mistake in galactic history. The Valkyrie did not send a warning. They did not issue a demand, or an ultimatum, or even a threat. One morning, the sky above Mira 7 simply filled with warships, and that was how 200,000 people learned that their lives were about to change forever. Captain Baek Jinu was aboard the UEN Horizon when the proximity alarms screamed to life. He had been drinking tea in his quarters and reading a letter from his mother. The cup shattered on the floor when the ship lurched. By the time he reached the bridge, his crew already had the tactical display up, and what it showed made his blood go cold. 47 Valkyrie warships had dropped out of faster-than-light travel inside the Mira 7 system. They were in attack formation. Their weapons were already hot. Jinu had 3 ships. 3. The Horizon, the Pale Wind, and the Songbird. Against 47 Valkyrie destroyers and cruisers, those 3 ships were nothing. He knew it, his crew knew it, and the Valkyrie certainly knew it, which was probably why they had not even bothered to hail them. He opened a channel to the colony below. He told them to begin evacuation immediately. He told them to get to the underground shelters. He told them to move fast. Then, he turned to his communications officer and told her to broadcast everything on every channel the ship had. He wanted the whole galaxy to see what was about to happen. Shin Hae-yoon was below decks in the engineering bay when the first shots hit the orbital station. The Horizon shuddered from the shockwave, even though they were kilometers away. She grabbed a support beam and held on as the lights flickered. Through the hull she could hear the deep, terrible sound of something very large breaking apart. She did not need anyone to tell her what it was. The orbital station held 12,000 people, families, workers, children on their way to school in the station's education ring. All of them were gone in less than 90 seconds. Hae-yoon stood in the humming quiet of her engine room and whispered to no one in particular that they had actually done it. The Valkyrie had actually killed 12,000 civilians on a live broadcast to the entire galaxy. She felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been holding steady for a very long time finally cracked. On the bridge, Genu watched the station die. He watched the debris spread out in a cloud that caught the light of Mira 7's sun and glittered like something almost beautiful. His weapons officer looked at him with red eyes and asked for the order to fire. Genu said no, not yet. He told them to hold position and keep recording. Every second, every angle. He wanted there to be no question about what happened here. No room for the Valkyrie to claim it was an accident or a misunderstanding. The galaxy would see everything. The signal reached Earth 7 minutes later. The United Earth Council was already in emergency session because long-range sensors had detected the Valkyrie fleet movement hours ago. But detecting a fleet and watching 12,000 of your people die were two very different things. The chamber fell silent as the footage played. Some members covered their mouths. One woman from the Eastern Federation stood up and walked out because she could not breathe. Secretary General Ko Tae-sun watched the whole thing without moving. His face showed nothing. Those who knew him well understood that this was when he was most dangerous. Not when he was angry, but when he had gone quiet. When the footage ended, Tae-sun asked everyone to leave the room, except Fleet Admiral Han Do-yu and Ambassador Yoon Nari, who was present through a holographic link from the Concord station. The three of them sat in the empty chamber, with the ghosts of 12,000 people between them. He looked at Do-yu and asked him a single question. He asked him if he gave the order, could they win? His voice was flat and steady, the way a man sounds when he has already made his decision and is only looking for confirmation. Do-yu was a tall man with a shaved head and hands that had never once trembled in his 60 years of life. He had served in the Earth Navy since he was 18. He had spent his entire career building something that he hoped would never be used. He looked at his Secretary General and told him the truth. He said they had been preparing for this for 140 years. He said the question had never been whether they could win. The question had always been, when? Tae-sun turned to Nari's hologram. Her face was lit blue by the projection light. She looked older than she had that morning. She looked like a woman who had spent her entire adult life building a bridge only to watch someone burn it down. She said she had spent her life asking the galaxy to see humanity as equals. She said the Valkyrie had answered that request with 12,000 dead. She said she had nothing left to say to them. Nothing at all. Tae-sun stood. He straightened his jacket. He pressed the button that reconnected him to the full council and to every Earth broadcast channel. Billions of people heard what he said next. He said that for 140 years, humanity had chosen peace. He said, let the record show, clearly and for all of history, that it was the Valkyrie who chose this, not humanity. He paused. He closed his eyes for just a moment, and then he gave the order. Across the galaxy, in the dim archive chambers of the Riashari, Chronicler Devi received the broadcast. She listened to the whole thing. Then she opened a new volume, pressed her recording stylus to the first blank page, and began to write. It read that at last, after 140 years of silence, the humans had said enough. She did not yet know what would come next, but Elder Motho was standing behind her, and the Old One's expression told her everything she needed to know. Whatever was coming, the galaxy was not ready for it. Not even close. The galaxy expected the war to last about 2 weeks. That was the general agreement among military analysts, diplomats, and the betting pools that ran quietly on a dozen space stations. The Valkyrie Dominion had the largest fleet in known space. Humanity had a modest navy, average technology, and a reputation for sending doctors instead of soldiers. 2 weeks seemed generous. Some predicted 3 days. On the 4th day, the predictions stopped. By the end of the first week, nobody was laughing anymore. It began in 19 star systems at exactly the same moment. Shipyard doors that had been hidden inside hollowed-out moons and buried beneath the surfaces of dead planets opened for the first time in decades. What came out of them changed everything the galaxy thought it knew about the human race. Thousands of warships launched in silence. Not old ships pulled out of storage, not civilian vessels with weapons bolted on. These were purpose-built war machines, designed and constructed over the course of generations in absolute secrecy. Their hulls were black and smooth and ate light like holes in space. Their weapon systems did not match anything in the Concorde's databases. Their engines burned with a frequency that Valkyrie sensors could not even properly read. And behind the warships came the drones, millions of them, moving in clouds so thick they looked like living things, pouring out of carrier ships the size of small moons. The galaxy called it the Black Tide. The name stuck because once you saw it, you understood. It moved like a tide. It was black, and nothing in its path survived. The first real battle happened at Mira 7 itself. The 47 Valkyrie ships that had destroyed the orbital station were still in the system, having set up a blockade around the colony. They detected the human fleet on long-range sensors and initially believed it was a malfunction. The numbers did not make sense. When the tactical officer aboard the Valkyrie flagship confirmed the readings were accurate, the commanding officer asked him to confirm again. He did. The readings were accurate. Over 300 human warships were entering the system in a formation so precise it looked like it had been practiced 1,000 times. Because it had. Captain Baek Jinnu and the Horizon were still in the system. They had been hiding in the shadow of Mira 7's largest moon, recording everything. When the Black Tide arrived, Jinnu received a single encrypted message from Admiral Doyu aboard the flagship Iron Meridian. The message was 2 words long. It told him to join the formation. Jinnu smiled for the first time in 4 days. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had been holding his breath underwater and had finally been allowed to come up for air. Shin Haeun pushed the Horizon's engines beyond every safety limit they had. The ship groaned and shuddered and held together through sheer stubbornness, and Haeun's hands, which moved across the engineering panel so fast that her crew could barely follow what she was doing. She kept the ship running through the entire battle. Later, when engineers examined the Horizon, they found that Haeun had improvised 6 modifications during the fight that were not in any manual. 3 of them became standard across the fleet within a year. The Battle of Mira 7 lasted 9 hours. Every single Valkyrie ship was destroyed. Not defeated, not driven off, destroyed. The human fleet lost 11 ships and mourned each one, but the result was total. The blockade was broken, and the colony below was free. Across the galaxy, species scrambled to understand what had just happened. Intelligence agencies pulled up every file they had on humanity. They found records of music festivals, and philosophy debates, and charity missions, and disaster relief operations. They found poetry and paintings and a species that seemed to care deeply about the feelings of others. And underneath all of it, hidden so well that not a single intelligence service in the galaxy had caught it, they found the truth. For 140 years, while humanity smiled and filed protests and sent doctors to help strangers, they had been building a war machine of terrifying scale and precision. Not because they wanted war, because they knew that someday someone would bring war to them. Ruler Othan received the battle report on his throne aboard the Valkyrie command station. He read it 3 times. His aides watched him, and none of them spoke, because they had never seen that expression on his face before. It took Othan a long moment to understand what he was feeling, because it was an emotion that Valkyrie rulers were not supposed to feel. It was fear. Cold, heavy, and very real. He ordered a full military mobilization. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon the Dominion had. For the first time in 6,000 years, the Valkyrie were not fighting to expand. They were fighting to survive. Legate Puri, who had once laughed at Ambassador Nari in the Concord chamber, attempted to open an emergency diplomatic channel to her. The request was sent through every frequency he had. Nari received each one. She declined them all. She did not explain why. She did not need to. Admiral Han Doyu directed the war from the bridge of the Iron Meridian with the calm focus of a man playing a game he had studied his entire life. He did not yell. He did not give dramatic speeches. He issued orders in a low, steady voice, and each order was followed by the precise destruction of another piece of the Valkyrie military. Those who served under him said it was almost unsettling. He fought a war the way a surgeon performed an operation. Careful, methodical, and completely without hesitation. In the Rishari archives, Elder Matha watched the reports come in. She had seen 10,000 years of galactic history. She had watched empires rise and fall like waves on a shore. She turned to Chronicler Devi, and her voice was quieter than Devi had ever heard it. She told the young chronicler to write her next words down carefully. She said the galaxy needed to understand something important. She said the humans did not become this overnight. They had always been this. They had always carried this inside them. They had simply chosen every single day for 140 years not to let it out. And now the galaxy had made that choice impossible. Devi wrote it down, word for word, and felt the weight of it settle into her bones. 3 months into the war, humanity had not lost a single major battle. The Valkyrie Dominion was breaking apart like old wood in a storm. Their outer colonies had surrendered. Their allies had abandoned them. Their fleet, once the terror of the galaxy, was retreating toward their homeworld in pieces. By every measure that mattered, the humans were winning. And that was exactly when the war began to cost them the most. Captain Bake Genu sat alone in his quarters aboard the Horizon after the Battle of Ocean Reach. They had won. His crew had performed perfectly. The Valkyrie force they had faced was destroyed in under 6 hours. But Genu could not stop seeing one moment from the fight. A Valkyrie troop carrier had taken a direct hit to its engine section. It had not exploded. Instead, it had broken apart slowly, splitting open like fruit dropped from a height. Through his ship's magnified display, Genu had seen the bodies spill out into the vacuum. Hundreds of them. Some of them had still been moving. He sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the wall, and could not make the image go away. He had not eaten since the battle. He did not think he could. Down in the engineering bay, Shin Haeun was keeping the ship alive through force of will and caffeine. She had not slept in 4 days. There was always something that needed fixing, something that needed adjusting, something that would kill everyone aboard if she stopped paying attention for even a minute. Her crew watched her with a mixture of admiration and worry. She was brilliant. She was also running on empty. When she was alone, her hands shook so badly she had to press them flat against the console to make them stop. She told herself it was just exhaustion. She knew it was not. On the Iron Meridian, Fleet Admiral Han Doyu sat in his office and read the casualty reports from the past week. His own people, Earth soldiers and sailors who had died in the fighting. There were 412 names on the list. Every name had a file. Every file had a photograph. Doyu opened each one and looked at the face and read the short biography that came with it. This one was 23 years old and had wanted to be a teacher after her service. That one had a newborn son he had never held. Another had been writing a novel in her spare time between shifts. Doyu read every single entry because he believed that if he was going to send people to die, the least he could do was remember who they were. When his aide came in and asked if he needed anything, Doyu closed the files and said no. His voice was steady. His eyes were not. On Earth, Secretary General Ko Tae-sun faced a problem he had not expected. The war was popular, enormously popular. After 140 years of being mocked and ignored, Humanity was finally hitting back, and the public loved it. Broadcast channels showed Valkyrie ships exploding, set to triumphant music. Crowds gathered in city squares to cheer when new victories were announced. Children played games where they pretended to be Admiral Doyu, destroying the enemy fleet. Merchandise appeared. Slogans appeared. The whole thing was starting to feel like entertainment. Tayson watched the celebration footage from his office and felt something heavy settle in his stomach. He was not disturbed by the war itself. He had made that decision with open eyes, and he stood by it. What disturbed him was the joy. Somewhere in the last 3 months, a significant number of his people had stopped seeing the Valkyrie as living beings and started seeing them as targets in a game. He had gone to war to protect his people. He was terrified of what the war was turning them into. He called Nari. Ambassador Yoon Nari was on a neutral station at the time, meeting with a coalition of 12 species who wanted to broker a ceasefire. Several of them had spent decades ignoring humanity's protests, and they were now very aware that the species they had dismissed was capable of breaking the most powerful military in the galaxy. They were polite in a way they had never been before, and Nari noticed. She listened to their proposal. It was reasonable. The Valkyrie would withdraw from all human space. Reparations would be discussed. A new security framework would be established. Nari did not reject it. She told them she would bring it to her government. But later that night, alone in her quarters, she told Taesun the real reason she was willing to listen. She said it was not because the Valkyrie deserved mercy. She said it was because humanity deserved to stay human. She said they had started this war to protect their people, and if they lost themselves in the process of winning it, then the Valkyrie would have won after all, just in a different way. Taesun was quiet for a long time after she said that. Then he thanked her. The turning point came when the Valkyrie homeworld fell within strike range. Admiral Doyu presented the battle plan to the War Council. His fleet could reach the Valkyrie home system within 2 days. He could end the war completely and permanently. He laid out the strategy with the same calm precision he brought to everything. When he finished, the room was silent. Taesun looked at the holographic display showing the Valkyrie homeworld, a planet of 11 billion people, cities that had stood for thousands of years. He asked Doyu one question. He asked what permanently meant in this context, what it would really mean. Doyu did not answer right away. He was a military man, and he dealt in realities, not comforting words. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual. He said it meant their children would grow up without a homeworld. He said it meant the end of the Valkyrie, not as a military power, but as a people. He did not say he wanted to. Taesun closed the briefing folder. He pushed it away from him, across the table. He looked at Doyu and told him to find another way. In the Rishari archives, chronicler Devi recorded this moment with special care. She noted that the other chroniclers agreed this was the moment that separated the humans from every conqueror that had come before them. They had the power to end a civilization. They had the anger to justify it, and they stopped. They stopped and asked whether they should. In 10,000 years of galactic history, Devi had never recorded another species doing the same. The Galactic Concord Chamber had never been so full. Every species with a seat had sent their highest-ranking representatives. Those without seats crowded the observation galleries above. The air recyclers hummed at maximum capacity. Thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds had come to see how this story ended. And the chamber was so quiet that you could hear the soft click of Chronicler Devi's recording stylus from the Rishari gallery. Ambassador Yoon Nari walked to the central podium alone. She wore no ceremonial clothing, no medals, no symbols of victory. She wore the same simple dark suit she had worn to every Concord session for 30 years, She carried a single data tablet. She placed it on the podium, looked out at the assembled galaxy, and began to speak. She did not talk about the war. She did not talk about victories, or strategy, or the power of the human fleet. She read the names of the 12,000 people who had died on the Mira 7 orbital station on the day the war began. She read each name slowly and clearly. She pronounced each one with care. Some of them were old names, and some were young names, and some were the names of children who had not yet learned to write their own. She read every single one. It took over an hour. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. Legate Puri, who sat in the Velkari section stripped of his rank and title, stared at the floor the entire time. Ruler Othan was not present. He was aboard a ship in orbit, waiting for the formal surrender. But his delegation was there, and they listened to every name. Somewhere around the 400th name, one of the younger Velkari delegates began to cry. It was a quiet, hitching sound that their species made when grief became too heavy to carry. No one told them to stop. When Nari finished reading the names, she set the tablet down and looked at the chamber in silence for a long moment. Then she laid out the terms. The Velkari Dominion would be dissolved as a military empire. Their war fleet would be dismantled. They would never again hold the power to do to another species what they had done to Mira 7. But their worlds would remain theirs. Every planet, every city, every home. Not one Velkari citizen would be displaced. Not one family would lose their land. Reparations would go toward rebuilding, not punishment. The Velkari people would be helped, not humiliated. If they chose, in time, they could rejoin the Concord as an equal member. Not above, not below, equal. The chamber erupted. Some delegations applauded. Others sat in stunned silence. Several species that had spent centuries living in fear of the Velkari wept openly. The Velkari delegation sat very still. They had expected to lose everything. They had prepared themselves for the end of their civilization. They did not know what to do with mercy. After the session, Legate Puri found Nari in a corridor. He was no longer the towering, smug figure who had mocked her in this very building years ago. He looked smaller, older. His scales had lost their shine. He struggled to speak, starting and stopping several times before he managed to form the words. He asked her why. He said she could have taken everything. He said the humans had the power and the right and the anger. He asked why they had not used it. Nari looked up at him. She was a small woman, and he was very tall, but somehow in that moment it did not feel that way. She told him it was because enough meant enough, in both directions. Then she walked away, and Puri stood alone in the corridor for a long time, trying to understand what she had meant. The formal surrender took place aboard the Iron Meridian. Ruler Othan came aboard with a small escort. He was enormous, even larger than Puri, with deep red scales that marked his royal bloodline. He had never surrendered anything in his life. His ancestors had never surrendered anything in 6,000 years. He walked onto the bridge of the human flagship, with his back straight and his eyes hard, prepared for humiliation. Admiral Han Do-Yu was waiting for him. Do-Yu stood alone at the center of the bridge. He had dismissed the honor guard. There were no cameras except the official recorder. No crowds, no ceremony. When Othan approached, Do-Yu extended his hand. Othan stared at it. In Velkari culture, the defeated knelt. They did not shake hands. Do-Yu waited patiently, his hand steady in the air between them. Othan took it. The handshake lasted 3 seconds. Do-Yu told him the war was over. He told him what came next was up to both of them. Then he offered him a chair and asked if he wanted something to drink. Othan sat down slowly, like a man who was not sure the floor beneath him was real. He said nothing for a long time. Then, very quietly, He said he did not understand the humans. He said he had studied them, and fought them, and feared them, and he still did not understand them. Doyu poured 2 glasses of water, and set one in front of the Valkyrie ruler. He said that was all right. He said understanding could come later. Captain Baig Jinu took the Horizon back to Mira 7 after the peace was signed. The colony was being rebuilt. New structures rose where the old ones had fallen. A memorial stood in the central square, a simple wall of dark stone with 12,000 names carved into it. Jinu stood before it in his uniform, with his hands at his sides. Shin Heun stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. They had both seen the same things and carried the same weight. They stood there until the sun went down, and then they went back to their ship. Secretary General Ko Tae-soon resigned 3 days after the peace was ratified. He did not give a speech. He did not write a memoir. He signed the documents, handed the office to his successor, and went home to a small house on the coast of a quiet sea. When reporters came to ask him about his legacy, he told them he did not have one. He told them the only legacy that mattered was the 12,000 names on the wall at Mira 7, and those names belonged to the dead, not to him. Centuries passed. The galaxy changed. The Valkyrie rebuilt their civilization as a peaceful trading nation. Humanity spread further into the stars, still sending doctors, still writing poetry, still filing diplomatic protests when they needed to. The war became history, and then it became legend. And then it became the kind of story that every species told their children when they wanted to teach them something important about the nature of strength. In the Rishari archives, chronicler Devi grew old. She had written more volumes than any chronicler before her, and the most important of them all was the one about the humans. On the last day she held her stylus, a young student sat beside her and asked the question that everyone always asked. The student wanted to know what made the humans different, what set them apart from every other species that had ever fought a war and won. Devi thought about it for a long time. She thought about Nari reading 12,000 names to a silent room. She thought about Doyu reading casualty reports alone in his office. She thought about Tae-soon walking away from power because he did not trust himself to hold it any longer. She thought about Jinu standing before a wall of names as the sun went down. And then she answered. She said that every civilization in the galaxy had known fury. Every civilization had known war. But the humans were the only ones she had ever seen who carried the full weight of what they could do every single day and chose to be gentle instead. And when they were finally forced to stop being gentle, they grieved for it. Even as they won, they grieved. That, she said, was why the galaxy remembered. Not because the humans fought, because of what it cost them to fight. And because, when it was over, they put it down. They said enough, and they meant it, against their enemies and against themselves. The student wrote it down, and the story continued as all the best stories do. Not because it ended perfectly, but because it was true.